such lifelong career and experts in education. I said, Dad, I worry about that too. So he enjoyed getting to hear your introductions and meeting you guys. We are called to order, and our first item of business is request for bill introductions. Representative Essex, we call you contestants. You get to be contestant number one. Could you tell us your RS number, please?
Yes, hello. It is RS 0577.
0577. And your bill is?
It is, this might be familiar, it's DARE 2.0, Drug Abuse Resistance Educator position. And there's a few changes in how it is funded, and I think it's going to be good, so.
Excellent. I do find that bill germane. Is there any objection to accepting the introduction? You are introduced. Do you have any others for us?
Nope.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else with a bill introduction? Okay, then I am going to be contestant number two. RS 0531 is an anti-bullying bill. And I find myself germane. That feels weird to say. Is there any objection? Hearing none, 0531 is introduced. And the next one is 0551, and that is request for alternative assignments, which is very germane to education. Is there any objection to this bill? Seeing none, it is introduced. Are there any other bill introductions? Mr. Hill, do you have your RS number for your other one? I think you have a friend who has it, but we can wait till Thursday, but okay, happy to take your preference. Anybody else with a bill introduction? Excellent. Today is about is our foster care report card. And it's always a hard day. We're going to listen, we're going to see what we can learn, and then we're going to have discussion on what are things that we think we can do to help to make a difference. So the first thing that we are going to do is apologize to Rebecca Gerhart. Somehow we got the wrong name, but you are who is going to present for DCF. But I'm going to go ahead and call you first and welcome you back. Thank you for being here.
With a little bit of experience this year, I remembered to turn on the mic. Good afternoon. My name is, good afternoon, Chair Estes, members of the committee. My name is Rebecca Gerhart, and I'm serving as the Department for Children and Families Director of Permanency and Licensing. And I appreciate the opportunity to come today and talk to you about the annual foster care report card. Hopefully you've all received my written testimony as well as the entire foster care report card. As you review that, you'll notice there are some additional data points that maybe we've not included within past years. Prior to putting together the report card this year, we had some conversations with some stakeholders, including Kansas Appleseed, about some data points that they thought would be helpful, not only for them, but for you as a committee when you're reviewing that report. So we were able to add some additional comparison points to how our students in foster care are doing when compared to our statewide population. So there are some additional data points this year that you didn't have last year. Also within those data points, there is a breakdown by male and female students. So you'll see those. We appreciate KSDA's help in pulling together that data. I sent over kind of a long list after a conversation, and they very kindly were like, we can do that. And so put a lot of additional information in there. As a general kind of background, I always like to start with our foster care numbers. The most recent count is what's included in the written testimony. That number changes from day to day, but we are around or under about 5,600 youth who are experiencing a need for foster care, which is the lowest number of youth we've had experiencing that need in about 12 years. During the process of kind of putting together the report and putting together the testimony on the report, we really have an opportunity to spend some additional time. Throughout the year, we spend time with our colleagues at KSDE, with our colleagues in the school district. And then as we prepare the report, we spend more time kind of walking through those data points, talking about it, making sure we all understand the information that is available within those reports. And often during this report, we talk almost primarily about the work that we're doing after a referral to foster care has happened. This year, a little differently, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some work that we have done with our assessment and prevention folks, so the front end of the DCF system. We've done some really significant and useful collaboration with our educational partners in our communities, our school social workers, our teachers, to really discuss our mandated reporting systems and ways that we can partner with education to help more timely and more locally help have access to resources for youth and not have them experience an episode of foster care if that can be avoided. That group put together not only kind of some day projects, but then a long-term collaborative where they are really working together, sitting in a room together, building a vision statement, building some new training, building some relationships to be able to help those education folks understand what resources are available within their community and how they can help families access those without the need for DCF to be involved. When we look overall at the data, we compare the youth who are experiencing the need for foster care as well as the general student population throughout the state. The work of equalizing those two groups isn't finished, but we have made in a lot of areas a lot of progress. When we look at our graduation rate, the gap is closing. It is still not the same, but that gap is closing. Last year, we were looking at about a 24% difference between youth in foster care and youth in the general student population. This year, that gap is only about 20%. So we're seeing that gap is closing. Within that cohort of youth that we measured for graduation rate, 100% of the Native American students who were experiencing foster care graduated from high school. The same is true for our attendance rate. Students in foster care are present in school nearly as much as their peers who are not experiencing foster care. There's only about a 3% gap when we look at the all student populations of youth who are in foster care and youth who are not experiencing foster care. For our Black students, that gap is only about 1%. The largest gaps between the statewide percentages for school attendance and for foster care occur within our Asian, Native Hawaiian, and white student population. Our Asian and Native Hawaiian population is very small, making up about a little less than 1% of the entire foster care population. So a student can affect how that number looks. We continue to see decreases in our rates of chronic absenteeism and have seen a slight decrease of about 0.5 percentage point between students in foster care and students and all Kansas students who are in education. Last year, we had about 5%, a little bit over 5%, 5.1% of students who were in foster care did not complete their education, so our dropout rate. That number has decreased this year to 3.9%. And the comparison gap, so the gap between our general student population and our foster care population continues to decrease. Last year, there was about a 3.5% difference, and this year we're at about a 2.6% difference. For our Hispanic students, there is a gap of less than 1%, so they're faring almost the same. For our Asian students, the gap between foster care students and the general education population dropped from 11.1% to 7.2%, and the gap for white students dropped from 4.1% to 2.7%. When we look at promotion to the next grade, we have about a 5% gap between the number of students who are promoted in the general population when we compare them to the students in foster care. But the percentage of students who promote to the next grade continues to grow. Over the last 2 years, we're up nearly a full percentage point. When we look at Black students in foster care, they're experiencing almost the same promotion rate as their peers in the student population, with about a 0.5% difference, or a little less than a 0.5% difference. When we look at that same information, promotion to the next grade level, younger students who are experiencing foster care promote to the next grade level at almost the same rate as their peers. That gap widens as we get into 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, with 11th grade experiencing the biggest gap between the general population and the foster care population of 17.3%, so not quite 20% difference. When we look at student discipline, we know that year over year, fewer students in foster care are experiencing in-school suspensions, but the average number of days of those suspensions are increasing slightly. Since last year, more students in foster care have received an out-of-school suspension, but the number of days has fallen. The largest decreases in our average number of days of out-of-school suspension has occurred for our Black and Native American students in foster care. We also look at the number of days and number of students who have been expelled from school, and the average number of days in the past year did rise, though it remains lower than where we were at 2 years ago. But the number of youth who experienced an expulsion continues to decrease. When we look at the resources that are available within our schools and the utilization of those services by our youth who are experiencing foster care, we continue to see an increasing number of children and youth that are accessing those services, either our at-risk preschool programs or our mental health intervention team programming. The number of schools who had mental health intervention teams increased from 56 2 years ago to 81 in the most recently completed school year. Their reach expanded to 410 of youth who are in foster care, so about 7.3% of the population, and about 4,000 students in the general education environment. About 87.7% of students who are in foster care are receiving at-risk preschool services, which is an increase of 3.3% over last year. And for our Black students, we know that more than 90% of them are accessing at-risk preschool services. So we continue to focus with our academic partners on helping to make sure or review whether or not students are prepared for post-secondary success. That number measures the number and percentage of students who score either a 3 or a 4 on state assessment testing. Between the 22-23 school year and the 23-24 school year, Kansas students in foster care increased their academic preparedness in both math and science, but did see a decrease in their preparedness in English and language arts. This is this is the area in which we see the largest gap between our foster care population and our general student population, though we know that across subject areas, our Black students have kind of the most equal performance with the general population peers. But this is the area where we see the largest gaps. We continue to enjoy the opportunity to collaborate not only with our state partners, but with our local educational partners to really have a child and family well-being system that includes our education population, where we can continue to see increases in outcomes for youth who need foster care and a decrease in the number of youth who experience a need for foster care. And we really appreciate the opportunity to work with all of those partners, both statewide and locally. And I am happy to stand for questions when you all are ready.
Thank you. Don't go far. I'm going to start with the first questions. Last year, we had a conversation with an organization that helped to follow the students, and they sent them letters and said, here's what you need to make sure that you graduate. And occasionally, they would call an old school, explain to the teacher why that child just disappeared, and they would help get the missing assignments. And they really helped graduation rate. And that really framed my thought process on these kids just are constantly having their life change. And that just really has been sitting in the back of my head as one of the things that we need to help the world move with them. And I felt like this organization was doing a very good job. And I know they were having budget trouble last year. We got them, I think we got them into your budget. Okay, and so they're in place and you guys are continuing to use them.
So I didn't pull the grant status before I came in today. I know we were awarded that money in our budget last year, and we had to set it up for an RFP. And so I know we were awarding that RFP. I don't want to speak out of turn about whether or not it's been awarded, but we'll check into it and get back to you about exactly where that process is.
I appreciate that. And one of the things that they did, that they expressed, that they encounter, and I think it's hard to have somebody who, there's a limited number of people who have a holistic view and are seeing what's happening in different parts of the system, and it's big. One of the things that they saw was sometimes guidance counselors, out of the goodness of their heart, were trying to bring them in mid-semester and put them in something they'd be successful at the expense of classes that they really needed to have. Are you guys having conversations with State Board? And I'm going to ask Dr. Harwood about that as well when he comes up, to make sure that we're doing everything we can for placement.
So I don't know that we have had a conversation with the State Board. I do know that our educational coordinators within our case management provider agencies are working closely with those local education authorities to make sure that as a move occurs, that that youth who are experiencing a need for foster care are enrolled in the appropriate classes. I don't know that we have engaged in a statewide discussion about that with the board.
I think that's an important conversation to have based on that feedback. And again, every time a foster child moves, everything about their life changes. And I think sometimes some of these children are in really great programs. We've heard from Spark Wheel this year. We'll probably hear from JAG-K, and there are others. And it kind of occurred to me that sometimes these students move, and I wish there was a way for their relationships with the organizations that they're a part of, who know them and care about them, could stay connected to that child as they move. So I'm going to leave that with you as a seed planted, and also we'll ask that of Dr. Harwood about that, because I think right now most of these programs tend to have an agreement with individual schools, and it kind of occurred to me it might be very challenging when a student that they have a relationship ends up in a completely different district that doesn't have that. And I think some of those programs also help with that credit thing. So I hope that we have a very serious conversation about how to facilitate that moving forward. Do we have other questions? Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. Can you walk me through what happens to a child to go into foster care?
So for kind of a big picture overview, our assessment and prevention team would receive, well, there are a few routes into foster care. The kind of common route is our intake center, our assessment and prevention staff receive an intake, and they go out and investigate that intake, will assess the family, assess the child, assess the environment, and if they are not able to support the family in maintaining that child safely within their home, they will contact their local county or district attorney with a request to file a petition placing the child under the jurisdiction I apologize, under the jurisdiction of the court, which may then also lead to placing the child in DCF custody. Not every child who is placed under court jurisdiction is placed in DCF custody. Another pathway that can occur for a child to be placed in foster care is law enforcement responding to a call, placing the child in PPC, and a petition for custody following that.
Okay, thank you. And what precipitates a child being taken from the home after a visit? I mean, just the cop or whoever is there would take the child away from that home.
So that can be very situational. If law enforcement is the person who does the removal, they're gonna look at what is the reason that they were called out to the home, and whether or not there is I don't have a statute book in front of me, but I believe it's a reasonable suspicion of harm, but I would have to look at the evidence standard for it, for that child, if they remain in their home. So it could be a lot of things. It could be an unsafe physical environment. It could be access to the child by a person who is unsafe. So there's about 12 or 13 definitions within the child in need of care code that can lead to a child in need of care finding.
My final question, if the child's not there, what's the process?
If the
The
child,
child's not there when the officer or the DCF person goes to visit the family, and the child that there is in question is not present, then what happens?
so I can't speak for law enforcement, but for our agency, if assessment and prevention goes to a home with the intention of seeing a child and is unable to see them in the home, they're going to attempt in other places. That may be at school, that may be at a daycare center, it may be back at the home at a later date. So we have a process to continue to make those outreach attempts.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Representative Pishney.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. The report is about children in foster care and how are they doing academically in school. Are the factors, and our chairman alluded to it with one of her questions, but are factors like how often that child has been moved from one foster home to another foster home, those kind of things taken into account when you say we're doing better or we're not doing as well and so forth? Because it seems like there'd be multiple factors that could be causing the results to be one way or the other, as far as the stability, I guess is the word I want to use, of that foster child.
So thank you for the question. I think that the best way I can answer that is when we're looking at the straight numbers, we're comparing the numbers that we have for youth who are in foster care and youth who are not in foster care. All of the youth, whether they are stable in placement or not, would be included within those numbers. So while placement stability is certainly a factor for a specific child and their education, and all of the factors that the chair mentioned are all factors in how a specific child is faring in their personal education, that would not necessarily affect the big picture number when it's a small portion of the population who's experiencing that more significant instability. That being said, as we're working individual cases, we are focusing on the stability for those individual youth and how we can assist in supporting them to have the best outcome for that youth when we're looking at their specific situation.
Thank you, and I'm not asking for a response to my upcoming comment, but my comment is based on, are we comparing apples to apples, or is it somewhat oranges to apples? Because there probably is more stability in the home for the other students to whom we're comparing. So that's the context in which I was asking the question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Representative Pishney, it's kind of an interesting thing. You can't assume one way or another, because it equally could be both, because some children get taken out of a home that's not giving them stability and they get into a fantastic foster family and they get to have that placement for a long time and they get more support than they had before. But that's also always not always true. Sometimes you get multiple placements, and I think it would be fantastic if we got to a point where our interagency or interstate data systems allowed us to delve down to a deeper level. And I think that's on us to figure out how to make that happen as we modernize computer systems, because we don't always, we often, we ask for deeper data and we hear, well, we don't have access to that data, and it's very difficult to get that. But I appreciate the spirit of your question. Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Brantley.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for being here today. I just had a wondering, actually. At the beginning, you said there are approximately 5,600 youth in the foster care system. Is that correct? And the number's down from the last 12 years?
Yes.
Why do you think is there an initiative or something that's been in place? And why the difference?
So we have invested, thanks to legislative support, a lot of time and energy within our assessment and prevention, within our family first services, within our family preservation services, all things that support families in building lasting safety without the need to come into DCF custody.
Thank you.
Representative Steele, and then we'll move on to Dr. Harwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report. As a school nurse, it's crucial to have these services. I've had to make many calls myself. Can you explain to me, because sometimes it's confusing on the school side when you're trying to help a student, whether they're with KVC or they're with DCF, and can you help me bridge some understanding there between that?
Certainly. So insofar as the state of Kansas goes, we are divided into 8 catchment areas, and who that child is going to be assigned to for their case management service is going to be dependent on where their case originated. So a child who maybe is placed in Johnson County but has a court case out of Sherman County is going to be managed by St. Francis, who is the case management provider for Sherman County.
So the place where the court case is, so the place where the issue happened?
Generally, the place where the child or the family was located at the time custody occurred. Sometimes that is the place where the thing happened that caused the episode of foster care. Sometimes that maybe is a surrounding county, but it will be the same general area as whatever precipitated the need for foster care.
So then DCF contracts with those 8 areas?
We contract with 8 providers who provide those direct case management services, yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I goofed. I'm going to give myself one more question. How many staff members do you have who monitor the education of and flow? Does it work where the individual case manager is supposed to be looking after the education of that child, or is there somebody who's monitoring everybody's education? How does that work?
So the answer is both and. I would have to get from our case management providers exactly what the number of educational liaisons is. I don't have that handy with me today. We have educational liaisons within our case management provider agencies, so St. Francis, Cornerstones of Care, Ember Hope Connections, TFI, or KVC. I think I remembered everybody. So within those agencies, they have staff who is specifically assigned as an educational liaison who has maybe a more in-depth knowledge of how to work with the school system, but the case manager who is assigned to the child is also involved in that process.
And do you ever measure by case manager graduation rates?
I don't believe we have ever.
Or academic success? That's something I would like to see. Thank you very much. Dr. Harwood, your turn. Thank you for being back. You have got to be so tired of seeing us from both committees.
I'm spending a lot of time with K-12 budget this week too, so it's I see a lot of you often. So I didn't prepare any additional testimony other than the DCF report. KSDE just stands in support of DCF and their report, so I'd be happy to entertain questions. Mine would be mostly about the data. I also have two other representatives, Joseph Jewett and Brian, now I'm just blanking on his last name, who also work at KSDE that have more experience with the services that are provided.
From Rebecca's testimony, you heard kind of gaps in percentages and you didn't see the hard numbers. So since we have so many freshmen, I'll just kind of point out in this report, this is where you get kind of your whole numbers of what those are. And I'd like to say I really love seeing the foster care next to the state on these reports. I find that very helpful. So some of the same questions I asked Rebecca and warned you about, I'll let you go ahead and address those.
So the first one with, so we were asked, DCF approached us about including the state comparison, which we already had that information. The hardest thing was getting it to fit on the report. And I would say to Representative Fishney's question, that's not there to compare foster students necessarily directly to non-foster students. It's there to just as a frame of reference. And so I think it's not surprising that foster care students do not perform academically as well as their non-foster care peers. But I think it is instructive to know what the gaps are, and then are we making up gaps? So I don't think it's there as more of a, well, look how bad this is. It's, can we make improvements and where that's at? So I think that's important. The other question that you talked about was, the specific one was about placement in courses in a local school district. I think there are things that the State Department can do to help DCF with that. I'm not sure that the State Board is the place to go with that. The State Board would not have jurisdiction of directing local schools where to place students in classes. That would be a local decision. KSDE can certainly, because we have contacts with all of the school counselors, could help set up times and places where DCF could work with counselors and helping them understand why, as you pointed out, maybe something that has the best of intentions of helping that foster student be successful after the placement may actually be detrimental to them later on. So I think that that's certainly something we would be happy to work with DCF on in connecting DCF with school counselors and doing that. But the State Board would not have the authority to direct districts how to place students in classes. And that would even be true when we start talking about the data on advancement in grade. That is a local decision that's made for a lot of different reasons. Same thing with a high school student when you're placing them in a class. Anytime any student changes high schools, especially more so in the middle of a semester, counselors do the best they can to match that up. Sometimes they don't even offer the same classes, and it's how can we match that up? Let's look and see what they need for graduation. How does that associate with the graduation rates or graduation requirements of the new district? Now, a student that's been in foster care can use the state requirements as opposed to whatever those district requirements are. So that eases things for graduation rates. But there's a lot that goes into it. And so kind of a one size fits all, this, you shall do this, I think would be detrimental to the students as well. But certainly working with counselors and getting DCF's perspective on that would certainly be helpful.
Thank you. And my other question was, is there a way that we could all work together to help keep a child in contact with an organization that has been supporting them if they are moved out of an area that has an agreement with that? And I know that's not exactly y'all's domain, but it's kind of like the last topic you just discussed. Unless somebody starts talking about it, we'll never have it.
Well, I think from the Department of Education's perspective, it would be knowing that that relationship is there. The school district wouldn't always know what other services the student would be provided through DCF. We are now in testing mode for a new statewide longitudinal data system that we've developed with federal funds over the last several years. One of the issues that comes up is that, and this will just one more confusing acronym. We currently use KIDS, which is the Kansas Information Data System. We're moving to KEDS, which is the Kansas Education Data System, so nobody will get that confused. The difference is our new system is more real time. And so one of the questions was about, how do you know how many placements they have? Well, KSD doesn't even always know how many different schools they've attended during the school year because we know where they are at the end and where they are at the beginning. With this information, we'll actually get nightly updates, so we would know better how often they're moving around, which would be able to help us drill down with some of that data. One of the issues we run with that, with reporting any of that data to the legislature, it's a really small number, and so we don't report any numbers between 1 and 9. So we'll tell you if nobody is there. Otherwise, there needs to be at least 10. Otherwise, you get into the ability to identify students. So with the KEDS system, when a student goes from one school to the next, our goal in that is that the new school immediately would have what I think they're still working on a name for it, but basically it would be the equivalent of a digital CUME folder. Wouldn't necessarily have all the things that, if you remember your CUME folder from school would have, but it would have, was the student identified as at risk or special education, and what services or what additional interventions were being provided. This would be similar when a school has somebody that comes in on an IEP. You have to sit down and say, okay, what was that? And then how can we provide that? And sometimes you can't provide the same services. In that case, you work with the family to decide how we're going to move forward. In this case, well, we know the student is a student in foster care, so if we haven't already heard from the DCF contractor, then we should probably be reaching out of, okay, what do we need to know? If the school was given that information about they have been in contact with this agency, we could pass that on to the next school. The other part is that we're also working on ways that we can better understand or shared data with other agencies. Because of our restrictions on sharing data, that usually means if you can give us your data, we can match it up with students, and then we can talk about what's going on with that. DCF would have the right to know some of those things, so that because they are actually acting as the parent in that case, so certainly we could share that information with them.
I'm thrilled to hear about the digital CUME folders because that was a pretty consistent complaint I received from folks on the ground working in these. And you kind of answered most of my question, but will that digital CUME folder tell you, say a student is enrolled in the program that I was referring to earlier, and they move to a different school, are we making it easy for that organization, Sparkwheel, JAG-K, and all the others who work in that space to get connected to that information, know where that child went? And if we're not, because there's certain barriers in place, I'd like to know what they are so we could maybe break down the barriers.
So a school's barrier for contacting, we'll say JAG-K, and saying, hey, by the way, the student is now with us, is that this new school doesn't have any permission to contact JAG-K and give them information about that student. If we knew that they were with JAG-K and that they were in foster care, what the school could be doing is reaching out to whoever their liaison is or trying to find out, hey, this information says they were in JAG-K, can you contact JAG-K and let them know that? So there would be, if it's a non-school or non-state agency, there would be some restrictions about a school just reaching out and say, hey, by the way, the student you're working with is over here now, mostly because we don't have any way of knowing. There is the possibility that the interaction that moved them to foster care took place in that situation. Now, I'm not saying anything bad about any of those agencies, but we never know necessarily why they're there. So there would be a problem with sharing information without permission.
It is certainly a complex problem, but I think the discussion is important. Do we have other questions? Representative Wolf?
I know that this isn't necessarily part of anything wrong with the system other than the parents and why children are there already. But how many of them, once they're actually in the system, ever get out? Do most of them just stay in until they're of age, or do you have a percentage on that?
I would have to defer.
That's really more in the purview of Dr. Gerhardt. Rebecca, do you want to come up and answer that one?
Sorry.
Though I don't by any means deserve doctor.
I realized that.
So I don't have the exact number with me today, but we're happy to get that for you, and it's actually available on our public website. But the vast majority of youth who experience foster care do return home.
Thank you. And we'll call Dr. Harwood back up. Any Representative Wolf, did you have any follow-ups?
I meant to ask her, and then we were done. And
That's okay. We'll let that happen, because today I think I left plenty of time for us to be informal and everybody to participate in the conversation. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Harwood, is there any data or correlation between foster care and special education? Because none of that's in here that I believe.
So I don't know of any right now. So the data that we have, for every student, we would know if they were listed as a student with a disability and in foster care. That has not been something that's been asked for on the report card, so I don't have that information now. That information could be known, is how I will say that.
I would love to have that information if possible. I think it's important to know that these are a vulnerable population, a vulnerable group of students that when their Maslow needs aren't being met, that compounds their learning. And so I was just curious.
I am pretty certain we would be able to give you a comparison between foster care students, the percentage of foster care students that are also students with disabilities versus the state percentage.
Perfect.
If we start breaking it down any farther, that'll probably be a lot of a lot of numbers are too small, but at state level, we should easily be able to do that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And for the benefit of newer members of the committee, whenever there are less than 10 students in a group, we don't mention what any results because it's too potentially identifying. Representative McNorton.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So, Dr. Harwood, going back to the statement you made or talked about with the students being transferred to other schools and the schools not knowing, why is that? Is that federal HIPAA? I mean, what could we do here in the state of Kansas or in this committee or whatever to change that so that would be available to the new school or what is that doable?
The information to the school, the new school has always had rights to the information from the old school. The problem has been the time it takes to get that there. That's why we're moving to a new data system where a lot of that will be electronic, and basically this new school would be able to go in and say, hey, here's our new student. We would match it to existing students. They'll say, is this the student you're talking about? And if it is, then that data would come over, if not immediately, the next day. What's been the problem in the past is, the receiving school district makes a call and sends a fax, and now you've got this folder of paper that somebody's got to scan in and send over. So it's been a logistic issue in the past, and we're trying to speed that up for as much data as we can that would be in a digital format.
So with that, would the receiving school, the new school, be able to follow through with the JAG or somebody else if that student is already using those services too? Or is that another problem with who's notifying who? Or
so in that case, if they would then know that they had been participating in JAG, and so they would be able to ask the case manager or whoever it is it's acting as the parent of the student, say, hey, can you make sure JAG knows they're here so we can work with them? Okay. And the new school just needs the same permission that the old school had to share information.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? All right, well, I still have more on my list. Just, I'll welcome to you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is just a quick question. I look at the promoted to next grade level, you have a comparison there. On the next page, do you do any comparing of the suspension and out of school and expulsions, any comparison from year to year?
So since 2017, KSD was not collecting statewide suspension and expulsion data. So we only collected it on certain students, foster care, special education, because we had to. We're asking for that information this year, so we'll be able to do that comparison next year.
So that makes me wonder, can I ask why they were not collecting that data?
So I've asked that question because I thought KSD did, but I wasn't here the year before that. And basically, it was not required, and there was a decision made not to collect data that was not required to collect.
I would hope they would follow up with that, because that would be some important information to keep kids in school. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there a list of, because I know of a few organizations off of the top of my head, but how many, or is there a list of all the organizations that help not only foster care, but other students in our systems with credit recovery and staying on target for graduation?
So most credit recovery, and I'll see if...
And that may be the wrong term.
Yeah, because most credit recovery is going to be through the school district or a service center that they're working with, because only the school can grant credits.
So we may need a new term, because the kind of credit recovery I meant was the testimony we got last year where the organization called, explained to the woodshop teacher who had given the student a D to be kind, and said, well, you know, I didn't have anything to give a grade on because the student just disappeared, and all I needed was a tree house, and that organization helped that child build a tree house, send it to the woodshop teacher, and then that D turned into an A. So maybe the term I should be saying is staying on target for graduation. I know a lot of the organizations that come before us talk about doing that. How many do that, and do you guys have a list? And I'll let you answer, and I'd also like to hear from Rebecca if she knows that as well.
I guess, to me, those are more transition services, just because it's helping that student transition and trying to make up what's being missed. But I will see, do we have a list of agencies that do that? So we don't keep that list. It'd just be districts, I mean, who's working with each district. So I would have to see if DCF has a list of agencies that do that.
Rebecca, do you guys have a list?
I'm not aware of a, Dr. Harwood is much taller than I am. I'm not aware of a statewide list. I am going to guess that our educational liaisons within our case management providers have lists of agencies close to them that provide those kinds of services, but I'm not aware of a statewide list.
Thank you. And perhaps both of your organizations could maybe work on that, and perhaps a conversation or some kind of meeting between all of those organizations with you guys could help on that. So my next complaint that I have gotten, and this one is for Dr. Harwood, is I've heard of children, this doesn't happen often, but once is too many. I've heard of children who were on target to graduate in one school district, they got moved to a new school district, and the number of credits was different. And I know that's a local decision, but is there room for someone to have leadership somewhere that we help a kid who's already going through a lot?
So a student that has been in DCF custody, I mean, there's a state law that says that they can graduate using or actually it's probably not a state law, it's probably state board regulation, that they can use the state minimum requirements. And so part of that would be is reaching out to us so that we could make sure that districts understood that if a student has been incarcerated or has been in DCF custody, they can graduate with the minimum state requirement. So if the like the district that I was last superintendent required 4 years of math. And so if you moved your last year, you may or may not have been taking math your senior year, which meant you weren't going to be able to graduate. So we would look at that and say, if that student had been in DCF custody, we would have waived that graduation requirement.
It's fantastic to hear that that exists. So maybe the problem is enough people don't know that that exists. Thank you very much. So, and based on what you said, we'll be able to know how many schools, by schools, I mean actual school buildings, a child attends in 1 year who's in foster care.
So yes, we would, the only way we wouldn't is if they changed schools twice in 1 day. I mean, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but I just don't know. But as long as we would know what, so what the enrollment record is the district and then the school of attendance.
Okay, I think that is fantastic information. I'm glad to see that improving. Do we have any other questions? Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're talking about the new data system coming in. Do you have a timeline on that?
So we are certifying student information systems so that every district has contracts for a student information system. We've been working for a couple of years, and now we have started collecting data so that we can test the system. Our plan is that next year we'll actually run both systems concurrently, just in case there's a problem. So as long as nothing goes really wrong, we'll have that in place next year, but we'll actually be running both systems at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Now I want to give you and Rebecca, and whichever one of you wants to go first, since we're out of questions, I think, and we still have 35 minutes. You guys sit and deal with these problems and these issues every day. And if there were things that you wish we knew that we could change that made it easier to do, to make it better on all of our students, but particularly the foster school care children who we're talking about today, what is that? What do you most want us to know that would help bring out good change?
So I guess I'll start with the statewide longitudinal data system. We're currently funding that with federal funds. Probably next year, we're going to come back with a budget request so that we can continue to move that. Mostly it's about the Azure portal that we have to use for that. So some of that is recognizing the, I guess, the benefit of state agencies working together and doing that, because we're also doing some work with pre-K. And so that we know the students that are getting KDHE services or DCS services or whatever those are, and so that everybody knows who those students are and is working with them. So some of the is the support of kind of integrating those data systems. One of the things that comes up with that is that we have the most restrictions on our data. So sometimes it's that KSDE has to house it and then work with everybody else, which we're happy to do as we move forward with that. The other part about that is, I think everybody, the questions were understanding it, but it's that every single student has a different situation, and students in foster care have particularly difficult situations. And so when we were talking yesterday about the blueprint for literacy and getting out of level 1, when some of our students are sitting down to take a state assessment, that assessment is not the most important thing in their world right then. And just understanding that, yes, we need to make progress, but we have to be understanding of the student situations and I guess being cognizant of, that's why we'll never have 0 in level 1, because somebody's not going to be having a very good day that day, and that's the one day. I think the rest of it is just the continued support for how do we help students that are there, and we've been working with that, and we'll continue to work with DCF and our other partners on trying. The state board's goal is to the success of all students. That includes foster students. So we need to make sure that we're continuing to work on that.
Thank you very much. Rebecca?
I feel like letting Dr. Harwood go first on this one was a mistake. I feel like he's presented a really great list of concerns, a really great list of things to keep in mind. I know maybe not exactly to your point, but over the last year, we've spent a lot of time working with our partners at KSDE because we know that the data system things are a challenge. We had a data system that was providing information to school districts and not matching up. So if our system listed, and I'm going to use my own name for instance, if our data system said Rebecca L. Gerhart and their data system said Rebecca Gerhart, those students didn't match, even if they were the same person. So over the last year or so, we've been working really closely with KSDE to figure out how can we build in ways for us to do a better job of matching that data, add in some ways for districts to claim. So I think a lot of us are working with systems that are very specific to our agency. And so that data matching process is difficult and we're working through those issues, but certainly we are in the middle of our CWIS systems builds, which the legislature has supported and we really appreciate. KSDE is in the middle of data systems builds. So I think as we move forward, we will have, the world of technology changes a lot. And so really understanding how we can get those systems to work together, because while KSDE has some very specific rules about data sharing, we may be the next worst partner because we also have very specific rules about what we can share about youth who are experiencing foster care. We have also seen a lot of investment from the legislature in our prevention programming, in that upfront work that allows us to keep students, and in this case, I'm going to use students, out of foster care when we can do that safely. And we really appreciate those investments. I think we will have continued requests for investments in those types of programming so that when we can safely do so, we cannot have a youth experience foster care. So that those outcomes are then within that general population, youth stay in their communities, youth stay with those services that they've already had. So I think those types of things, as we move forward, you will see additional requests for, and we really appreciate the support that we have received in the past and hope to receive in the future. I don't know how well I answered your question, Chair.
Well, I think you answered it well, and I'd encourage you to keep thinking about it. You kind of made me think of a question in terms of student privacy. Does a guardian ad litem, I know a foster parent can say, I give permission to share information, but can a guardian ad litem, when they're thinking of, or a CASA advocate, how much do they get to see what's going on, especially when they have the ear of a judge and say, Judge, it's really important for you to make sure that this child has this academic need met? I don't know, so it's truly an informational question.
So our guardian ad litems and our CASAs are both included within our statutory information release, both for agency records as well as for the official file held by the court and the social file held by the court. DCF records, once a case is filed, kind of fall into three buckets. The agency records, so the things held by DCF and the case management providers. The things that are in the official court file, so those are things like the journal entries and motions and notices. And then the things that are in the social file, which are court reports, critical incident reports, kind of the different, more kind of specific, maybe more detailed information about that youth and their family. And a guardian ad litem would have access to all of those sources. Our guardians ad litem spend a lot of time learning about the youth that they serve. I think we know that we don't have enough guardians ad litem throughout the state. We have some areas that have, I don't know that we have any area that has enough. Even in the Wichita area where we have a large number of attorneys, we don't necessarily have a large number of guardians ad litem. And that's for a lot of reasons. And then we get into some of our rural and frontier counties, and they may not have an attorney in their county at all. Like there are counties out in our frontier areas who don't have any attorneys that are there at all. So they also don't have any guardians ad litem. So those folks are doing traveling. They may be serving a youth who is located completely across the state from them. So our guardians ad litems know a lot and do a lot, and they do it with very few resources.
Fantastic. Thank you for that answer. That was very enlightening. Do we have any other, Representative Ruiz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what I understand from you is that guardian ad litems are attorneys?
Yes, so in Kansas, guardians ad litem are attorneys.
So if I'm just an attorney from just graduating from law school, can I become a guardian ad litem? Is there any credentialing for me to pass?
So Supreme Court Rule 110A includes some additional continuing legal education that is required for guardians ad litem to have in order to work with their local jurisdiction in order to be a guardian ad litem and to be assigned as a guardian ad litem. But as far as educational credentials, yes, a law school degree and passing the bar is what you need. And then there are some continuing education requirements.
One more question. And who credentials them after their requirements? Do the courts?
So their local judges would ensure that they had those continuing legal education requirements, and then those would be recorded in their continuing education transcripts. So for attorneys that do continuing education, the CLE Commission tracks all of those continuing education credits, and guardian ad litem credits are tracked. I think they have 2 asterisks. There's a way to see those within the attorney's transcripts.
Welcome. That was interesting to learn about. Representative Brantley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question about the data system, and I don't know if Dr. Harwood would best to answer that. Is the data system an in-house system or one that's purchased?
No, it was developed by KSDE programmers.
And so with that, having our recent, I believe it was Power School data breach, cybersecurity and such, is that?
So, yeah, I mean, cybersecurity is something that our IT team works on continuously. And so, for instance, when Power School had their breach, even though you should never use the same password in more than one system, we don't think that's true. So we reset all of our expired all the passwords for everybody across the state that has access to any of our authenticated applications, which this would be one of those. And so we have a system set up, just like if you go out and set up a system, something at your bank, we require multi-factor authentication. We use industry standards for password length and strength. And so, yes, we do that. And then just so, I mean, most of you would know that the legislative post audit has a specific IT security audit team, and KSD was audited last year. And I can't tell you anything about it because it's confidential, but I think we did pretty well. We learned some things from it, but overall we found out that we're doing a lot of the right things.
Thank you. I have one more question. So back to the data on the state assessments for the 1, 2, 3, 4, and looking for where students are. Have they talked about using any type of growth model there rather than an achievement?
So, yes, it's been talked about quite a bit with the way we've developed the test. It doesn't work from grade to grade, so that's not something that is a function of the current assessment.
All right, thank you.
Representative Schreiber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Harwood. When you mentioned the federal funding for your computer system update, in light of the administration's memo about pausing some funding, has the department looked at that and see if there will be a delay at all, or do you know yet?
The good news about that one is we already spent all that money. So
okay.
That one's okay. We are still looking at the indication that we received today is that Formula grants would not be impacted, so that would be title funds, ESSER funds. We are still not sure about student nutrition funds because we got information from the Department of Ed, not the Department of Agriculture. However, we have a second SLDS grant for pre-K. That would be considered a discretionary grant, so that one we would have more concern about.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome. You guys are asking great questions. Any more questions? Representative Pishney.
Just a quick follow-up question, since he was picking on me the other day, Madam Chair, but so if grant monies are not available to sustain that going forward, are we talking $1 million or $10 million or I mean, what if it becomes a state responsibility after the grant expires?
So I don't remember the exact number. I think it's less than $1 million. But what it actually is for is that so the system is built using Azure, which is a Microsoft product, and so it would be the continued licensing to be able to use that system. So the federal grant paid for the staff salaries to develop it. It would be the ongoing costs.
Any more questions? Then I will close it out with an invitation to both you and Rebecca. You've talked about your new systems. Obviously, we sound very curious. I think we've all had times where we have wanted information and been frustrated when departments can't, data systems don't talk to each other and so on, and you recognize that you will need to come back to the legislature for ongoing support funding. So if there is a time that either of you want to come back and show us your new systems whenever it's in the right phase for that, I think we'd have a strong interest in seeing that. We thank you both for your time and I appreciate you being here today. Announcements. Representative Schmoy and Stogsdill are both online, so we have everybody here today. I'll be getting the weekly calendar out tomorrow. I need to line up a couple of things before I warn you guys what's coming, but I will. I think you guys kind of appreciate getting that heads up, and I appreciate trying to get it to you, and I appreciate when you guys give me grace when everything changes at the last minute, because that is the nature of this building. So does anybody have any questions for the good of the order? Seeing none, we're adjourned early, 20 minutes.